Good morning. This week I want to do something a little bit different. It's the beginning for Christians across the world of a new year, a new season, the beginning of Advent. A time when we look forward to this Christmas season, the celebration of this incoming, this indwelling of God in the world in a particular way. I want to read a story this morning as opposed to tell it, so let me give it a go. It comes from the New York Times and some months ago, March this year, by Sabrina Tavernise. And she says this: in war things can change quickly. You look away and the kaleidoscope has turned. Suddenly the greens click out of view and the reds have taken place. I wanted to capture, in whatever blurry way one can in war, where the kaleidoscope has stopped turning at this moment, 3 weeks in. And she's talking about the war in Ukraine and really wanting to get an inside story from a few particular people. And so she interviewed people who had come from places that were often too dangerous for reporters to go to, using phone and internet and other ways that she could. And this is one of the stories. It's a story of Vika Kurilenko. She's 46, a television screenwriter and journalist. She has 3 children, 20, 10 and 5. She was interviewed on March the 12th. She escaped from Bucha, a small town northwest of Kiev, which was taken by the Russians after days of fierce fighting. She says this: that morning my daughter had to have a filling fixed, so we went to the dentist. And already when we were driving, we began to see these terrible explosions. The sky had begun to rumble and there was black smoke. It was so weird. It was like some dream. There we were going to the dentist to fix her tooth. And suddenly there's this background of big black clouds of smoke on the horizon and fighter aircraft. Suddenly there were these huge flows of cars and traffic. At first we were hopeful. I remember standing near the window washing dishes and seeing out the window that 4 tanks with Ukrainian yellow and blue flags drove down our street. I just cried with joy seeing that our tanks were there protecting us. Our building was eventually hit by a shell or mortar. The building itself did not collapse, but the water supply system was damaged. Then there was no power, no water, no heating. On the 4th day the telephone communication was cut. We were afraid to be seen or heard at all. We even blew out the candles at night so the Russians wouldn't see us from the windows. At some point I remember trying to catch a mobile phone signal on the balcony. And I looked out over our city. We have such a lively city. There were lots of storefronts and street lights and trees and water and rivers, cars driving around. But when I opened the window this night, it was as if we were on the steppe, somewhere with no light. Only a sky so black, as if you were somewhere on the outskirts of civilization. Some kind of apocalypse. That was what our beautiful town had turned into. Somewhere on the 5th day the Russians took control of Bucha. One night a woman knocked on our door and crying begged my husband to help her husband. He had been wounded. He just went for a walk down the street to get a sense of whether his family could leave. And a Russian armoured personnel carrier shot him in both of his thighs, and he couldn't walk, and he was lying still there. And so my husband with this other guy, Sasha, somehow got him, somehow brought him in. A doctor lives in our building and she bandaged him, but they didn't have medicine. They couldn't call an ambulance because there was none. I honestly don't know about his fate. I just had a feeling that we had to get out of there. Every minute you hear these explosions, these shots somewhere nearby. It's hard to understand. Are you a target? Even if it's silent, the silence feels ominous. There is just this constant sense of danger. And I had a great sense of guilt that I was not protecting my children. I felt like a terrible mother because my children are in danger and they're suffering, it's cold and they have nothing to eat. So we decided to leave. We needed to get to Irpin. There was some kind of transfer that would help take us to Kiev. To get there, we had to cross this park. And as we entered the park, some kind of madness started. It was shelling, it was shooting. We all fell to the ground and covered our heads. Everywhere around us there was glass exploding, flying glass. My husband put his body over our daughter, the youngest one. The bridge was out, so we had to walk across this piece of metal. Suddenly again there was shooting from both sides. There was a sound of shots hitting metal. We got to the ground on our palms, and on the other side there was a soldier, one of ours. He helped pick Marina, my youngest daughter. She thought it was all a game when he picked her up. She laughed. I write TV shows, but now I feel like I'm a character in one of them. I didn't want to leave my homeland. I was satisfied with my country, even with all its shortcomings and all its complications. But now I understand that tomorrow is my last day in my country. I don't want to be a refugee somewhere in a foreign land. I'll miss my home, I'll miss my things, our photographs, pictures of my parents. I left my diaries, my children's toys, my dresses. And that's Vika's story. That's one particular story of one particular family in one particular world this year. In many ways, it's one story that represents millions, maybe billions of stories. People across the world caught up, suddenly engulfed in an experience that changes their lives, turns everything upside down. The thing they least expect happens, and it consumes them their whole life. And nothing is the same again. For some people, this story is ongoing through the impoverishment of drought and famine, of not having enough food or medicine or water. For others, it's the ongoing trauma and struggle with mental health or physical health, or the oppressive regimes and persecution they feel in their countries. For some, it's being refugees locked in refugee camps around the world, and others enslaved in the sex trade, in human trafficking, or in sweatshops. For all of us, in moments of life, we're caught, whether it's in grief or guilt or despair or challenge or sickness or whatever it is. And our world turns upside down and inside out. And we don't know what to do or what to think. Everything changes. This is not just my experience and your experience or Vika's experience. It's the human experience. And it's the human experience that it's always been. Life is difficult. It has its very rough edges and its hard core. And life can be difficult. Especially when some people claim power and oppress others or fight others or invade nations or use violence or greed to deprive others of freedom and life. That's our world. It's not all gloom and doom and hatred and warfare. There is beauty and wonder. This week, as we begin this journey to Christmas, there is this story that sits in front of us and draws us onwards. This story about the way in which God enters into the world in particularity, breaks in unique moments, in this particular unique moment, in the birth of the Christ, that names hope in particular ways. God is with us in the mess. God is with us in the midst of the chaos and holds us in grace and love. Sometimes that seems thin and uncertain. We don't know what it means. Life is falling apart all around us. Where is God? Are questions we ask. This week's stories we read, one comes from an ancient book, Isaiah, 2,500 years ago. As the nation of Israel, Judah, the lower southern nation, southern kingdom, was experiencing attack and warfare, particularly from the Babylonians. And they would be overrun and overwhelmed and their city destroyed. And the leading citizens and artisans and craftspeople would be taken off into Babylon, into exile. In the midst of this, prophets like Isaiah speak. And he speaks in this early part of Isaiah about judgment, that your lives are focused in the wrong way and you're losing your way, and you'll experience the pain and the struggle that comes out of bad choices. But he also then goes on to say, God is with you, and there's this promise for your children and their children and children, a time will come when there'll be peace, when the weapons of war will be melted down and used for weapons of creativity, or for tools of creativity, for farming and building and life, where people will look and see that God is in our midst, and that this God brings justice and hope and life. And I guess that's what the symbolism of the birth of the Christ is about. That God is in our midst, promising a way, a different way, an alternate way in the world, which is about love and justice and peace and hope and life for all people. Inclusive belonging and community that everyone can be part of. In the gospel reading, there's this great warning. It comes at the end of Matthew's story of Jesus. And he warns of this incoming day of the Lord, this time of God, that comes in the least expected ways, that comes in the strangest moments that we don't understand. He says Christ comes, God comes like a thief in the night, breaking in and creating havoc in our lives sometimes. And sometimes that is the way of God. In the midst of the struggles that people like Vika experience, God opens us up, uses these moments, not creates them or causes them, but uses these moments to open us up to generosity and love and growth and becoming compassionate, strong, courageous people who stand up for what is good and true in life and the world. Sometimes God's coming is gentle, like a sunset or a sunrise, that fills our world with light and love and colour and wonder, and holds us in the deepest, darkest moments. In just that moment when fear and anxiety and uncertainty threatens us, God's hold around us is love and fills us with a hope or a courage. There are moments in which, in the midst of life, God breaks in with glimpses and moments of beauty and wonder and joy. And if our eyes are open, if our hearts are attuned, we see it and experience it. Jesus says God is breaking into your life, in the little, in the profound. What is God saying to you? Where is God leading you? What is the hope? What is the purpose, the meaning? What is the joy? What is the justice or the love? What is the call on your life? To walk into a new way, to be people of peace and life and hope in the world. Because after all, this is what Christmas is about. Hope, joy, peace, love. That's what the message and the story is about, and that's where we're journeying. And as we journey over these next 4 weeks, I invite you to take time, whether it's each day or each week, to stop and look and listen and see, where is God? Where is the sacred? Where is the holy? Where is the wondrous in the midst of your life? And what is it saying to you? And maybe in the midst of that moment, you might like to think beyond yourself into the world and offer a prayer for people like Vika and her family. Those who have too little, who are impoverished and hungry. Those who are fleeing persecution. Those who are in refugee camps. Those who are struggling with illness and mental illness and grief. And what might you do to make a difference, to be a person of peace and hope and life in the way of Jesus?